Heritage Frederick's curator, Amy Hunt, has a degree in art history from the University of Maryland at College Park and 13 years of experience as a curator and museum educator in fine arts museums. Jody Brumage is the archivist at Heritage Frederick and has worked with archival collections for the past 10 years and has a passion for studying Frederick County history. He received a BA in Public History from Shepherd University and a Master's of Archives and Records Administration from San Jose State University. Would you all welcome Amy Hunt and Jody Brumage.
Well, thank you so much, Corey, for the invitation and for welcoming us here to the Delaplane. It was a grand trip of about 2 blocks from the museum, so if you haven't been to Heritage Frederick, it's not that far away. After you've explored the galleries here at the Delaplane, just head in that direction, go past the library and 1 more block, and you'll be at the Museum of Frederick County History, which we call home, and where the exhibit that we are discussing today is currently on display. So I'm going to begin just by giving a very general brief overview of what Heritage Frederick is, and then we'll dive right into brushes with history. So Heritage Frederick is also known as the Historical Society of Frederick County. We've been around for quite a while, for over 130 years. We were started in 1892. And Heritage Frederick encompasses a couple things. We are the Museum of Frederick County History, which is located, as I mentioned, over on Church Street in the historic John Boltzel House. We have the Frederick County Archives and Research Center, which is located down in the bottom level of that building. So if you are interested in ever doing genealogical research or researching a property in Frederick County, it's a fantastic resource for you to use, and it's open to the public free of charge. And we're also part of a growing network of members dedicated to collecting, preserving, and sharing Frederick County stories, including those of our many talented artists who we were very fortunate to get to learn more about this year. Our journey from 1892 is a varied one. When we started out, we were just a group of folks that would get together somewhat like this and share stories. They would meet in each other's homes and talk about their families or historical events. One of my favorite things that I've come across in processing our collections is this little handwritten note sheet, which is from our 5th meeting in 1893. And they were already reading Jacob Engelbrecht's diary. So if you come to Heritage Frederick today, you will most likely encounter Jacob Engelbrecht somewhere. He is Frederick County's prolific diarist of the 19th century, and just all-around chief gossip of everything that went on in this community for the better part of 60 years. We opened our first actual museum in 1945 in the Steiner House, which is located out on the west end of Frederick at the corner of Patrick and Jefferson Streets. That is where the Frederick Women's Civic Club is located today. And our museum there opened in Frederick's bicentennial year, 1945. And we were located there until 1959 when we moved to our current building over on Church Street. So we've been in that location ever since. That building is a beautiful mid-1820s federal mansion built by a doctor named John Boltzel for him and his wife, their 10 children, and as many as 8 enslaved people who lived and worked on that property. It went through 2 more private owners before becoming an orphanage for girls in 1882, a function it served for about 75 years until 1956. And then, as I mentioned, since 1959, it's been the Historical Society. So I'm going to turn it over to Amy to give you a little bit of information and background on our collections in general.
All right, so we, as the Historical Society, were previously set up as a house museum, having rooms that would have been contemporary with the 1825 structure of the house. And what we have more recently tried to focus on is honing the collection and focusing on people who live in Frederick County. So we're looking at artists from Frederick County, we're looking at the people and families of Frederick County, We're looking at industry, manufacturers, things that are produced in Frederick County. So all of those things fall into our collections. One of the things I like to say, between Jody and I each kind of have separate collections. So myself as the curator, I get all the three-dimensional stuff. So if it's cannonballs or guns or quilts or dresses or paintings, those are all me. And Jody, as our archivist, has land deeds, wills, books, rare printings from early Frederick printers, photographs, all those sorts of things. So it's kind of an encyclopedic collection, but again, we try very personally to hone in on exactly what the Frederick connection, what the Frederick story is on each and every one of those pieces. So in addition to all of those things, we also have some early famous Frederictonians. So we do have things relating to Thomas Johnson and Francis Scott Key, Roger Brooke-Tawney, of course Barbara Fritchie. We've got tons of Barbara Fritchie stuff. John Thomas Schley, who is the first official resident of Frederick City, and as Jody mentioned, Jacob Engelbrecht. We also have items that relate to famous people coming to visit. So Jody, I think, is going to mention a little bit later. This year is the 200th anniversary of Lafayette coming to visit Frederick. So we have items that were part of those celebrations. We have some clothing that women of Frederick wore to the ball when they danced with Lafayette. We have a Coke bottle from Harry Truman when he came to visit Frederick and stopped at a gas station, drank a Coke at the counter in 1953. So it's a lot of different things. We are always adding to the collection almost every week. We have a lot of people who, when you're cleaning up your family's homes as people are downsizing, there's a little bit of a disconnect between people saying, oh, I have this old stuff, or oh, I have historically important information. And Jody and I have really taken a good look at the collection, which is not all that fleshed out after 1920. So we're really focusing on the most recent time period of history and making sure that our collection is representative of that time period as well, so that we're better served in the future by covering all of our bases there.
So the exhibit that we opened earlier this year, Brushes with History, was an awesome opportunity to actually get to explore a little bit of that post-1920s time period. A fair amount of the exhibit that's on display is post-1920s. And so the genesis of the idea for this exhibit, which I'll preface by saying each year we change out the entire first floor of the museum. Upstairs, we have some other galleries. Some of those are permanent exhibits. There are also some changing exhibits up there too. But the first floor is a wholesale change every year. So you can come back year after year and see new stuff. When we were planning for this year, really it began because some of us, including Amy and I, are huge Helen Smith nerds. We love her artwork, collect it, and really appreciate the contribution she made to not only preserving the image of local historical landmarks, but really crafting the iconic images of Frederick that we think of, in particular the clustered spires and the landscape of Frederick County. And so that was really the beginning. We wanted to do something with Helen, but we'd done Helen Smith exhibits in the past, so we couldn't just simply do a Helen exhibit. We wanted to look before and after, figure out what stories we could tell that would be heightened by a feature on Helen Smith. And so from that basis, Brushes with History came about. That included surveying our collection and looking at all of the works of the visual arts by Frederick Countyans, and we have many, lots of which did not make it into the exhibit. But we honed in on sort of a specific cohort of artists. We looked back to artists who were contemporaries with Helen or who taught her, and we'll spend a little bit of time really describing one of those artists in particular. And then we looked at artists who came after her and who kind of picked up the tradition that she started and worked that forward in time. And so the result was a 3-gallery exhibit that covers works of visual art ranging over 2 centuries and going all the way back to the founding of Frederick in the 1740s, all the way up to much more modern and recent works of art. And one of the things that was particularly rewarding, because going into it, one would assume we were expecting to see lots of paintings of spires and mountains and bridges, covered bridges, and all the iconic images you think of for Frederick County. But really, what was amazing to see as this exhibit came into shape was all the other artwork, all the other styles, mediums that these local artists have worked in over time and that we're fortunate to preserve at Heritage Frederick. So Brushes with History is more than a Helen show, even though that's what it started out as, the idea. It really is an exploration of visual arts over several centuries and how those artists have contributed to crafting our image of Frederick County. So with that, we'll dive into the first main artist that is featured.
All right, so we talk a little bit in the gallery about what came before Florence Daub. So there are a couple works of art. Art was happening in early Frederick, but she really kind of changed the scene here in Frederick. Florence was born in 1851 to an upper middle class Frederick family. Her father was a merchant who is related to the Kemp family that goes back a long way in Frederick, and her mother was a Staley, again, a family that had been in Frederick for over 4 generations by the time Florence comes around. Florence was passionate about music and about art, and her mother before her had attended the Frederick Female Seminary, which, if you're familiar with our location on Church Street, is right next door to Winchester Hall, which was built as the Frederick Female Seminary. So her mother graduated in 1846. Helen followed in her footsteps and attended also. She got her first degree in music, but her hearing was failing. So she ended up getting a second degree in art from the Frederick Female Seminary. So after she graduates in 1868, she goes to the home of her uncle, James Gambrill, and lives at their home in Edgewood. It's called Edgewood. It was at Monocacy Junction, and starts to act as a family tutor for his children, her nieces and nephews that are quite a bit younger than she is. And Florence then gets a job at the Frederick Female Seminary where she had graduated from. She starts teaching drawing and printing, and she stays for quite a while. She actually stays through every iteration of their name changes until it's Hood College, and she is the head of the art department. So for many, many years, she was in the art department at Hood College. She also taught art at the Maryland School for the Deaf for over 50 years. What was great about Florence, most people called her Miss Floy. Miss Floy, because of her social standing, was a topic of conversation in the local newspaper almost daily. So the society page, what was happening in town, almost every day it's talking about the cohort of artists that this woman had built up around herself. She really made it acceptable for middle and upper middle class women in the community to attend her art classes, to become part of her artist studio. And that artist studio, the people she surrounded herself with, turns into, in 1897, what is now, and was originally called, the Frederick Art Club. So the Frederick Art Club still exists today. We met yesterday here. We meet the second Thursday of the month. It is a dedicated group of women artists or art lovers at this point, but originally they were artists that Florence had taught. You had to be accepted into the art club, You would have a panel of judges review your work before your acceptance. You had to agree to sell some of your artwork in order to benefit the group. And so that there was a dues as well that you would pay so that she could maintain the studio space for you. And they subscribed to a lot of art publications that you then had access to. So Florence was passionate about painting flowers, painting animals, painting nature. She did a lot of plein air work. She took her students outside into the open air. We have information and diaries and newspaper reports of them going as far as the Jersey Shore to paint together. We have photographs of them included in the exhibit painting in Thurmont. But she really made this sort of endeavor popular and acceptable for upcoming women of the age. So I'm going to give it to Jody, and he's going to talk about Helen, who comes after.
So as Amy mentioned, Florence's subjects that she loved were nature. So in the exhibit gallery, you see paintings of flowers, landscapes, including a stunning oil landscape that is on loan to us. And I'll mention here that Amy's going to talk a little bit at the end about the loaned works for the exhibit, but the exhibit is about 50% loan and 50% from our collection. So it is the first time that all of these works have been displayed together ever. Florence also did a lot of local scenes, and one of the really cool aspects of the exhibit is being able to look at a scene through Florence's eyes. Here is Carroll Creek in what we would today know as Baker Park, looking towards the clustered spires. This is a scene that Helen would then paint many times over, and then artists after her too. So you can actually see the same places through the eyes of different artists over a century of time in the exhibit, which I think is really amazing. At the end of the talk, we actually have one of Florence's sketchbooks, probably dating from about 1900 to about 1910, up here on the table, which you're welcome to come up and see. So that brings us to perhaps our star of the show, Helen. Helen Leona Smith was born in 1894, and she grew up on a farm just outside of Frederick. She attended the girls' high school on Church Street. And unlike Florence, who did enjoy the support of her family to pursue her artistic talent and to make that her life's work, Helen did not have that support. Her family was not particularly enthusiastic of her desiring to pursue a career as an artist. Her first sort of foray into art was submitting a work to the Farmer's Journal, and she won first prize, for which she was sent a set of watercolors. But without her parents' support, it actually fell to her uncle, John Travers Smith, who, seeing her talent, worked to get her a scholarship to attend MICA, the Maryland Institute of Art in Baltimore. And that really set Helen on the path to becoming a professional artist. And so she attended MICA. After she graduated, came back to Frederick and joined the faculty at Hood College, working under Florence Daub, and joined the Frederick Art Club as its youngest member. And in 1925, she made another significant move and opened what was probably one of the first art studios in Frederick, and certainly the first to be owned and operated by a woman. So Helen, as an unmarried woman in the 1920s, running her own business, is quite a trailblazer in Frederick. This is a photo of her inside the first studio space she had, which she describes as this very cramped space. It had no heat except for a wood stove, and she rented it from the Wertheimer family. Eventually, she moved the palette shop, is what she called the studio shop. She eventually moved it to her home up on Braddock, going out of Frederick on Route 40 toward Middletown. But if you went into the palette shop, you would see all of the work that, if you know Helen, you're familiar with. You can see in the picture here, there's paintings, there's tollware, painted metal trays and tins, other items, painted lampshades, silhouettes back here on the wall, painted china up on the shelf there. And really kind of one of the features of the exhibit is a small recreation of this scene. So working off of this photograph, we put together a corner vignette of the palette shop, above which is the original sign, which we were very fortunate to find thanks to Facebook. Put a message out there and say, we're doing a Helen and Florence show. Does anybody have anything? And voila, someone had the original sign from the palette shop and very generously loaned it to us. But everything in that vignette is by Helen. And just a small sampling of, again, the incredible output of artwork that this woman did. But what is particularly, I think, unique about Brushes with History and its approach to dealing with Helen's story is that I've mentioned we've done Helen shows in the past and showed the iconic paintings of the spires and the swinging bridge at Carroll Creek and the things she's remembered for. But Helen really was Frederick's first commercial artist. She was really the first graphic designer that you could go to here in the city and have her produce something for your business or your organization. She did hundreds of painted invitations for weddings. She would create posters for local businesses. One of my favorite items in the exhibit is this really cool Art Deco looking poster that she designed for the effort to build the Francis Scott Key Hotel in the early 1920s. And if you're up on what's happening in Frederick today, they could just reprint that poster and start using it again because it's advocating for the downtown hotel and what it will do for local businesses and all of that, but 100 years ago. She created a lot of these types of works for the Frederick News Post. There's this fantastic poster that she designed here heralding the new Frederick. And I brought along a sampling of some of my favorite things in the exhibit by Helen are the covers that she would design for the Frederick News Post almanacs, these little yearbooks that the Frederick News Post put out. And they really show just a range of styles. She was doing cartoons, she was creating these illustrated maps and all kinds of images depicting Frederick in this exciting era of growth and change. And it's just an amazing element of her work that even prior to this exhibit, I wasn't very familiar with. It was really exciting to see these pieces kind of trickle in through the loan offers and to see those come together. One of the other really exciting things that we were able to do to tell Helen's story was work with Hood College Archives, where Helen's papers are located today and preserved. And one of the things that they had were these boxes of tracing sheets. And you can just barely see on the bottom of the picture here, here's one of these wax paper tracing sheets that corresponds to the border on this painted plate. And Helen did hundreds of these plates, and this is how she was able to do it, because she would create these tracing sheets, and then herself or the women she employed in the palette shop could recreate them over and over again. And a lot of times the plates have local landmarks on them. I selfishly picked my favorite building in Frederick, the Old All Saints Episcopal Church on Court Street, which is the subject of this one. But there are several of them in the exhibit, and we were able to, thanks to Mary Atwell, the archivist at Hood, find the original tracing sheets and match them to the plates, which I think is a really cool show of the process that this artist was using to create such an incredible output of work. We also were loaned a couple works from very early in Helen's time as an artist, even going back to the time that she was a student at MICA, including some of these really cool architectural sketches that she did. And then we also give a lot of attention to Helen's role in documenting historic landmarks in Frederick. There's a corner of the gallery dedicated to this. Her artwork was really important, especially early on, in capturing a disappearing landscape. Frederick was evolving and changing dramatically in her lifetime. And she was committed to capturing buildings that were no longer standing or being taken down, and local landscapes that were rapidly changing. So again, one of those scenes that you see very frequently is the swinging bridge over Carroll Creek at what we would today know as Baker Park. That's a scene that she painted dozens of times. The clock that is photographed here, another favorite subject of hers was Jug Bridge, the old crossing of the Monocacy River on Route 40 going east out of Frederick toward Baltimore. And that, in this case, both of these works are iglomisé. They're reverse painted onto glass. And that's another element of the gallery for Helen, is, again, just showing all the mediums that this woman was very skilled and adept in creating art in. Oil, pastel, watercolor, painted porcelain, iglomisé, silhouettes, tollware, painted furniture. There are coats of arms that she created for local families, and she would research the heraldry, going back through these families' lineages to come up with these coats of arms. And that's another thing that Hood College preserves, is boxes of these coats of arms, and the research notes that she had to create them. So Helen also created a number of commissioned artworks, which we also discuss and feature in the exhibit. The grandest of those is a work called Justice, which I had photographed on an earlier slide here. So this is what Justice actually looks like in its current display over in City Hall on the stairway going up to the second floor. But this was a work that Helen originally created in the 1920s on a commission from the Daughters of the American Revolution. And it originally hung over the judge's bench in the courthouse. But over time, it had been taken down and rolled up and stowed away in the attic. And then in the 1980s, the courthouse moved into its current building, and the city took over the old courthouse. And while renovating it to become City Hall, the painting was found. And Helen, who at the time was in her early 90s, restored her own painting that she had done in the 20s. And it is a beautiful, striking work. We were able to reproduce it with permission from the city, but what you see in the gallery is only a half-size replica. It's a massive work of art. The other really iconic image that she created as part of commission work was Frederick's city seal, which of course has the iconic clustered spires on it. So the city seal actually goes back to 1945, when Helen was hired, much in a sort of a graphic designer capacity, to create an emblem for Frederick's bicentennial celebrations. And what she created was this block print image of the spires that was just printed in a single color, a kind of a burgundy-ish red, with lettering denoting the bicentennial of the founding of Frederick. But in 1976, Mayor Ron Young invited Helen to revisit that work, add color to it, and kind of re-envision it to become what is still today the official seal of the city of Frederick. So when you look at that lengthy body of work and all of these iconic images, you really gain an appreciation for the role that this woman had in shaping what are the typical images we think of when we think of Frederick City and County. She was an incredibly talented, gifted artist, and from every account, an incredibly gregarious personality. People loved to be around her. In addition to being a very prolific artist, she was also a master gardener. There are still gardens in downtown Frederick today growing plants that were seeded from plants that Helen gave to the gardeners there. We're actually working on hopefully bringing some of those to the Heritage Garden behind the museum as sort of a living legacy of this incredible woman to live on at the museum in the future. So with that, I'll pass it back to Amy to talk about the last gallery of the exhibit.
All right, so the final gallery of the exhibit we refer to as the Legacies Gallery. And this is where, the first two galleries we've tried to start at the beginning of art in Frederick and work our way through these two amazing women. The final gallery has 12 or 13 more modern artists who either knew the women or represent a lot of the same themes that they found important. The two people that you see here, the one closest to me, this is Alice Witter Thomas. Furthest away is Bessie Hargett Clapp. They are two women who worked at Hood College alongside Helen Smith and learned from her, learned from Florence. You can see a lot of similarity in their painted china, in their artwork. These two women, unlike either Florence or Helen, would go on to get married and have families, at which point their artistic careers sadly petered out, unlike, again, the two women before them. So we have some people who worked very closely, but we also wanted to certainly include men in the exhibit. So we have, again, more recent people. As someone who has worked in art museums before, and we are not an art museum, we are a historical museum, it was very important to me because Frederick has tons of amazing art centers and art opportunities and galleries that we stick with people who had already passed away. We didn't want there to be any problem about who was included, who wasn't included. So what we looked at first was our own collection. So who did we have represented that we felt fit into this category, whose art could herald back to either Helen or Florence? And then there were a couple where we didn't have what we wanted to be found in our collection, so we tried to search those pieces out. But we have other painted furniture included. Helen painted furniture. We have Austin Steinhaus painted chairs. He worked for Goodwill Industries for a number of years in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, repainting old historic furniture in town and in all of the other museums. We have Carl Butler represented. He was a Brunswick artist. Again, he is much better known for his mural that is on All Saints Street and Ice Street found in town, but he painted a reproduction of the Bartonsville Coronet Band drum. Linda Postel, these are Bob Hassel from Middletown. And again, we're looking at the themes of Florence. So nature, painting outside, local scenes. So you see scenes of Middletown, you see painted furniture. Helen painted everything: furniture, silhouettes, decorative items. So we're trying to look at that. And then historic buildings. So Linda there has a painting of City Hall, because again, important buildings and our heritage and history are important. These are some more people who, while they did not work directly with Helen Smith, and certainly not Florence who came before her, again, these historic buildings are very important. So we have Quinn's Hardware, painted by Sherry Kemp. In the center there is Barry Richardson, who, if you went to any outdoor festival at all ever in the 60s, 70s, 80s, or 90s, you know Harry and Barry Richardson. We've made a really great relationship with his wife, Shirley. You know, we had a couple prints in our collection, and that was it. And we contacted her, and she was thrilled to give us some of his original watercolor pieces. So we now have several original Barry Richardson watercolors in our collection. This, another graphic artist, just like Helen worked in graphic arts. This is James Pearl. He worked in graphic arts, and he was hired by many businesses for many, many years. But this is one of his mural-sized scenes of the square corner with the trolley. So again, capturing something that no longer exists, but is a very important part of Frederick's history. And that's where we kind of wrap it up for the gallery. So again, we tried to make all three galleries flow. So again, it's not just a Helen exhibit, it's not just a Florence exhibit, but we're trying to relate the qualities of their work and the content of their work and how that carries over into the artwork that still exists mostly today. So curating brushes with history. Again, we looked mostly to start with what was in our collection. We knew we had to have a lot of Florence because we were going to dedicate an entire gallery, and certainly when we sat down in our meetings, and again, we start our exhibition meetings in April, and we don't install the exhibit until January. We realized we didn't have very much in the way of Florence Daub. We had some sketchbooks like the one that you see here. We had a few small pieces of her artwork, but we really needed to do something about that. And the way that our team at Heritage Frederick has decided to focus our exhibits and focus the content of our labels is that as a team, we want each piece of artwork to have a story. So in all of our exhibits, you'll see a label like this, and that will tell you all about the artist. So it'll give you biographical information, family information, content about their careers. And the way that I go about getting that information is to start by making a family tree for each person. And that's not as obvious when it's something like a painting because we know who they are and what their career was like. But it started with our textile exhibit the previous year where we were researching wedding dresses. And part of the thought behind researching a wedding dress with a family tree is to make sure that if you say you've given us grandma's wedding dress, we check the dates, we check the design, we check the style, we check her lifetime, and we make sure all of those things come together in a way that makes it reasonable that that was grandma's wedding dress. Because sometimes it doesn't, especially if it's great-great-great-grandma's wedding dress, and maybe you've lost a great, or in the storytelling as it gets handed down, something gets missed. So we want to make sure that our labels are super accurate. But what we then do is we come up with a list of people who are still living, who are related to each of the objects, and I handwrite them note cards. So when we come down to Helen, she never married, she never had any children, but she came from a large family of siblings, and she has dozens of nieces and nephews that still live in this community. And they were thrilled to get a note card saying that their great Aunt Helen was going to be represented. And they invited Jody and I over to the house and let us pick what we wanted for the exhibits. Jody and I actually were borrowing items for the previous year's exhibit from the daughter of Alice Witter Thomas, who is included in the Legacy Gallery. And she happened to have hanging on her wall this enormous painting by Florence Daub and told us all about it. So that ended up being the highlight of our Florence Daub exhibit. And in addition to getting a whole network of people excited about the exhibit because they have a relative exhibited, it also creates a lasting relationship with that family to know that we are honoring the people who have come in their past. They have then turned around and looked at us as a place to contribute things to the museum, to make our collection stronger in the future. So, back to Jody.
And before moving on, I just have to say Amy deserves a ton of credit for the hundreds of handwritten note cards that go out every year to make these connections, but it has become one of the really rich components of this work because it really is emphasizing to people that this is your county museum, this is your family history, it's your heirlooms that are on display that you're entrusting to us, and we want to make sure we do the honor of telling the stories correctly and in an engaging manner, and Amy is just an absolute exceptional pro at doing that, so she deserves a lot of praise for that hard work. So to wrap up, it's been really fascinating to see people engage with the exhibit through the year. For some of our out-of-town visitors, it's a lovely little geography lesson built in because it's just a lovely little visual tour of Frederick County that they get to go on through the galleries. But for longtime Frederick residents and people who are familiar with some of these artists, it's truly been wonderful to see how these stories and artifacts are resonating with folks. One of the one of my favorite stories that Amy was able to pull into the Legacies Gallery is the fact that I didn't know this, that Barry Richardson did not like or did not consider himself skilled at painting people. So in his paintings, when he has human figures in them, a lot of times the human figures were painted by Sherry Kemp. They were very close friends, so Sherry and Barry, we have our Sherry Barry wall in the exhibit where their works are hung together because they collaborated. And in fact, after Barry's death, Sherry finished a couple of his works that hadn't been finished yet. One of the other Frederick artists that we were able to feature and who has a prominent role in that Lafayette exhibit coming up is Virginia McLaughlin. So in the third gallery, we recreated one of Virginia's room-sized wall murals that can be found in houses all through downtown Frederick and other places too. Virginia took inspiration from the printed scenic wallpaper that was popular in the early 19th century in America, but she would create these images with local scenes. I've been had a privilege to see a dining room she painted over by Baker Park for a family. The father was in the Navy, and she painted Annapolis and the Naval Academy and his ship sitting in the Severn River in front of it. While you turn around and look at the front wall, there's Baker Park from the vantage point of this house. The wall that we chose to recreate is found in the Ross House on Court Square over by City Hall, and it depicts the arrival of the Marquis de Lafayette into Frederick in his grand military parade that was held for him in December 1824. So that anniversary is coming up later this year, the 200th anniversary of his almost 48-hour stay in the city of Frederick, but which lived on large in the memory of people in Frederick County for generations after. So one of the things that we've created within the Brushes exhibit and our other exhibits is a special guide. You can pick it up at the front desk either in print form or by QR code on your phone. And it allows you to go through the galleries, and in certain places you'll see little Lafayettes that tell you the story of his visit through, in a lot of cases, the artwork that was either recreating his visit or the landmarks, the places that he went to. In that way, the artwork comes alive in a new way to be a storytelling device to convey this event from the past. But again, it's been really thrilling to see our visitors come in and engage with these artworks and learn about these artists, and I hope that you will do that as well and come see us. Heritage Frederick is open Wednesday through Saturday from 10 to 4. We are free admission for the rest of this year, thanks to a very, very generous donor. And the exhibit will be open through December 14th, which is Museums by Candlelight in Frederick County. So that's our closing day. After that, all the artwork comes down, and Amy and I will be loading up our cars and restocking people's living rooms and taking all their artwork back and setting up next year's exhibits. We reopen every year around the 1st of March. So with that, we'll take questions if there are any, or invite you to come up and see some of the artwork up close. But again, thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you for being here today.
And next year's exhibit is?
So next year, we will actually have 2 exhibits on the main floor. One of those is going to be an exploration of music in Frederick County history, from the earliest known compositions by Frederick Countians up through some of the popular artists who have performed here in the past. And then we also will have an exhibit exploring the parallel lives of 2 significant community founders in Frederick County, Joseph Dill Baker, whose name you might be familiar with because of Baker Park, and Emory Koblenz, who both had significant contributions in philanthropy and business and in civic leadership in Frederick between the 1880s and the 1930s. So those are the two exhibits that are going in place of Brushes with History next year. Yes?
Do you ever walk around antique stores and see things that should be accessioned into your collection?
Yes, all the time.
Yes. We also have, there are a couple antique stores and the Restore up the street that know us and are familiar with us, and they will call us if they see something.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do have people in the community that kind of keep an eye out.
And I get about 30 notifications from eBay
Yeah,
every day on my phone
exactly.
telling me what's for
Yeah.
sale.
Jody and I are on top of that. Yeah. Anything else we can answer for you?
All right.
All right, great.
Thank you
Thank
all
you.
again.